Welcome to Content with Character, the weekly podcast that'll give you the momentum you need to create content with more ease, clarity, and laughter. I'm your host, content copywriter Emily Aborn, and I'm all about unconventional marketing approaches. I believe in your big ideas, and I'm excited to help you share them in a way that's distinctly you. If you do a Google search on how often we get distracted, you will get page upon page telling us how hard it is to keep our attention. And if there's one thing I know about human beings, it's that if what they're focusing on is not interesting or they get distracted, they tend to check out and we might lose them forever. Now, we don't want that when people are consuming our content, do we? No, we want their focus and attention, preferably their undivided attention. This podcast will walk you through some ideas on how to decrease the distractions and give you some tangible examples. Hi, welcome back to the Content with Character podcast. It feels like it's been a while, even though it was just last week we chatted, but for me it feels like it's been a while, and so I'm super excited to be here. I have some fun in store for you today, and I also think I'm going to be able to keep this episode short and sweet. Let's see. It'll be a challenge. We can always guarantee fun here on the Content with Character podcast, but we cannot always guarantee short and sweet. Okay, to get us started, I wanted to share where the idea for this episode came from and then paint a really quick picture for you of where I'm taking you. And then you better put your scuba suit on because we are jumping right in. We are diving right in. Now, before we even begin, I do want to say that any links I reference will be in the show notes, as well as any additional resources I mention in the episode that I thought might be helpful for you. I also do an extensive version of my show notes with all of these points listed out for you, so you don't have to take notes or even think about taking notes, because some people tell me they like to take notes. You can just do what you're doing, sit, listen, soak it all up, or walk and listen and soak it all up. This past year, so here's where this kind of idea came from. This past year, one of my main focuses was speaking at conferences, leading more workshops, getting into more organizations and small groups, as well as being a guest on other podcasts. Now, as I said, it was one of my main focuses, and focus I did. It was a record-breaking year for me with all of those, and I actually am really going to just double down, I think, in 2024 and make it even more full of these opportunities because, one, I learned that these things bring me immense amounts of joy, and it's really fun to share my message and information in this way. It feels very alive, and I get to really connect with so many great people when I do so. And two is that it's fun and I get to connect with so many great people. So one and two, same reason. But this fall, September through October, I spent a lot of time out and about in the real world, in the wild, as I like to say, speaking and presenting, like I said, for various organizations and conferences and stuff like that. I also got to, as I shared in a recent episode, listen to a lot of speakers and presenters as well. And in both listening and presenting, I learned just how easily distracted we are as people. And in every room of people, you kind of get to either snooze them, lose them, or keep them hanging on every single word. Now, of course, I have not yet mastered the latter yet. If you have, please let me know all of your secrets. But I did pick up a few things around how not to make people fall asleep during your presentation, how to keep them more engaged, and ideally not introduce more distractions for them. Because here's the thing, when you are delivering content in a format like this, audio only or video, or even if it's written, but if you're standing up in front of a room full of people, all of us as content creators, as content deliverers, we have a big job. We have to deliver the content in a clear, concise, understandable way that also helps their brain to stay engaged and attentive if we want them to fully soak it all in, right? Fully absorb it all. We also have to contend with the fact that people are naturally highly distractible. And even if they're reading world's most riveting novel, sometimes all it takes is a child tugging on their arm saying, "Mommy, I'm hungry," or their brain going down the dark, dangerous rabbit hole of the internet because they had a thought and for some reason they now feel the need to research it right then and there. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but this has happened to me. I've been watching a TV show and my mind is just completely someplace else. And I realize after a few minutes, like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what is happening in this plot. Or maybe you've turned, 3 whole pages in your book only to realize you have no idea what you've been reading. You've actually just been mentally writing your grocery list instead. So, like I said, I'm not throwing anyone under the distraction bus here because I am also guilty of it as well. Though I do think that someday soon, I'm going to do an episode on focusing and time blocking and task batching because I think in our work and in our productivity, I think that we can help ourselves to be a little bit less distracted. I know that for me, I have really good systems in place, and when I choose to use those systems, when I choose full focus, those are the days when I tend to be fully focused. I know, it's a shocker, but I do have, like I said, some systems and tips around how to do that. So I think I'm going to do that another day. But today I really want to talk about it from your your reader or your audience's perspective on the things that might be causing them to get distracted right in your content itself. Now, as I say that, I want us to realize that to some extent, what we give our focus to and not getting distracted, that is a choice. Some of it comes from the inside, right? And what we how we've actually taught ourselves to focus and not get distracted. And some of it is in the outer environment. And that could mean for our content, how things are delivered, but also what other kind of things are trying to work their way in at the same time. So some of it is in our inner environment and some of it is actually what we're focusing on or how that focus might be being disturbed. And with human beings, let me just tell you a little thing about them. I'm sure you know quite a bit being one yourself, but if what they are focusing on is not interesting or it distracts them in some ways, they tend to check out. Now, we do not want people who are consuming our content to check out because when they do, we run the risk of losing them. We don't want that. We want their focus and their attention. And I would venture to say, preferably I'd like your undivided attention for as long as I can get it. So this podcast is going to walk you through that. Some ideas on just how to decrease the distractions. And my goal is really to provide you with some tangible examples and things that you can start implementing right away. So that's where we're going. That's why I chose the topic. And the only other thing I think I need to make sure you know before we just get right into this is who I am. Because I don't want you to be listening to this episode distracted by wondering who is this person and what does she do? So if this is your first time listening or we're not familiar with one another yet, let me just save you from yourself. I will save you from distracting yourself with those ponderous thoughts. I'm Emily Aborn. I'm a content copywriter, a podcaster, a speaker, and my work is around helping small businesses and women entrepreneurs bring their words into website copy, into blogs, and into other content in a really clear, non-distracting way that is full of character. I believe in content being really true to our unique personality, style, and as I say in my intro, distinctly them. Distinctly you. Okay, that's enough about me. You can find everything you need to know about me in the show notes, also at emilyaborn.com, and we can connect in any place that we're not already connected, or you can send me an email. Lots of many ways to get a hold of me. Okay, let's get into the episode. Why are we so distractible? And another question, are we more distractible than ever? I did some looking into how often we are distracted, and I found that on average, listen to this, you're not going to believe this. On average, we are distracted about 47% of our waking hours. Now, when you look at that statistic, what is actually happening is that our minds are wandering away from what we're doing or should be doing approximately half the time. Now, some of this is due to repetition, right? We're doing things that are very repetitious and our brains don't need to focus. And then some of it is just because that is actually the natural state of the brain. So if you do a Google search on how often we're distracted, is it more prevalent with smart devices, and you start kind of asking questions like that, what you're going to get is page upon page upon page telling you how hard it is for us as human beings to keep our attention. Now, tech, pings, dings, notifications aside, being distracted, as I mentioned, is actually quite normal. It is quite human. Unless we're meditating and or intentionally focusing our brain on something, a thought, an idea, what we're working on, the brain's natural tendency is to wander around kind of aimlessly. And it bumps into things, then it turns around and goes in a different direction until it bumps into something else. It's a fun mental image. So without being aware of what you're doing up there in your head, more often, or if you don't have the tools in place to reel yourself back in, this happens to you too. It is totally normal. It is human, but I think it's really important. I think it's important to know, first of all, what's going on in our own brains, in our own minds, as well as what's going on in other people's, because brain bouncing aside, like let's just put the natural state of things aside, as content creators, speakers, podcasters, writers, we are actually up against, besides just people's brains, we're up against some other forces too. We've got the kids and the husbands and the notifications and the tech and the errands and life. We have like literally sometimes mere seconds with people. Now, this is not to discourage you. It's really, I think, important to be aware of, because here's what I think it does for us. It gives us this invitation to say, okay, this is like what is happening. People are moving very quickly. They are likely to be distracted much of the time. How can I be more clear? How can I be more concise? How can I be more engaging and make sure that the words and the message that I'm sharing really do matter and count, stand out maybe from all that other noise that they're taking in? So I thought it would be fun to share with you some ideas I had on lessening distractions, holding interest. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by sharing this high level list of ideas with you, but then I want to get into some specifics. So here are some yes, do this in our content, no matter how you're kind of creating the content, where you're sharing it. So here's my list of do's. Do tell stories and share personal experiences. Do use a sense of humor if you have one. Do show visuals and video if you can. Ask provocative or thought-provoking questions, or, questions that are just like a little bit introspective for the person interacting with it. Share your own perspectives and your own personal opinions on the topic. And also tell people what it has to do with them. Everybody stops suddenly being distracted when it has to do with them. So remind people what it has to do with them. I think that sometimes it can be fun. I'm not saying you do this all the time, but sometimes it can be fun to gain attention a little bit playfully. Okay. I used to be I don't know what you call it, like a daycare worker, a daycare sitter, I don't know. But we used to say things like, okay, if you're listening, put your hands on your head. If you're listening, touch your shoulders. If you're listening, quack like a duck. So it was just like really kind of fun things to get everybody engaged and paying attention to what we were saying next, which could be something really boring, like we're going to need you all to get in a single file line now, please. But I think we can do this in our content too. And you don't need to say it like, if you're listening, put your hand on your head. But you can call attention in your content in different ways. Something like, hey, stick with me here and read this. Or you have 2 minutes for this post. Or you have 2 minutes for this idea. Or don't look away from this, or something terrible will happen. Just kidding. Don't use that last one. That's ominous. But you can use little call outs to attention once in a while in your content. Just like call it right out. Or like, I know you're probably going to get distracted halfway through this. Stay with me, or save this post and come back to it so that if you get distracted, you can come back and finish it later. So that's one idea. I do find that, let's talk more long-term or long-form content. I think that when you're delivering in that way, it's really beneficial to kind of set it up in the beginning. So kick people off by focusing them in and letting them know from the get-go where you're headed. Here's today's topic. Here's where I'm going to take you. then you take them there. And then, of course, at the end, you can wrap it up again by just telling them what you told them briefly and concisely. It's a super basic and very well-known format, very well-known structure. You hear me do it all the time on this podcast in various ways. I like to get you feeling really cozy, really comfortable that I have a plan, I have a direction, I'm not just babbling on, and then we dive into the plan together. So preview plus content plus summarize. It's like the perfect yummy content sandwich. Alrighty, and in the nature of giving you a preview, I'm going to share where I'm going in this episode today. So I'm going to share a few suggestions, both in the speaking and written categories of sharing content. And then I'm going to summarize them all for you at the end. And I will forewarn you that even though I'm going to break it down speaking versus written, some of these are going to easily and naturally fall into both categories. So I would just keep your ears open the entire time as to how you could apply something where. But let's start with speaking. You have already heard me share the importance of previewing and summarizing. I think when you are delivering audio, video, or like a presentation, that is really, really helpful. And in a way, I see it as a gift, right? Like I'm letting them know why they should keep on being excited, why they're going to want to keep on paying attention. So giving cues can be really, really helpful. Like, for example, we're going to get to that in a minute, or I will touch on that in just a minute. Things like this help signal people to know what is coming, and actually can just help them stay focused and engaged, especially if they came to your talk or your presentation for sort of one little specific thing. It can cue to them that that thing that they came for, or what they might be sitting on the edge of their seat waiting for, is coming soon. When speaking, podcasting, podcast guesting, using video, I really believe that one of the best ways to keep people engaged is to actually be engaged yourself. Be present, be energetic, be alive, and be in the room. Even when I'm podcasting to you right here, I am envisioning just having a conversation. Like my goal is to be present. I'm trying not to venture to the past, the future. I'm trying to be present. And I think that that is a huge gift you can give to your audience, to your listeners, to whoever you're sharing with. And it helps them to stay engaged when they know that you are also engaged. As I mentioned before, I love adding in storytelling, humor, visuals, engaging questions, or an engaging introduction. Another thing I love to do is to piggyback off another speaker's remark or theme. So you can bring ideas together for people. Now you can use specific examples. In that, you can also use specific examples of what's happening in the room, like what is special about this specific group or this specific setting, or maybe you even use an example of somebody that you know in the audience. All of these, using any of those techniques, require you, the one presenting, speaking, podcasting, podcast guesting, they all require us to be present, to be in that room. And I assure you, it pays off to really bring people in and to make them feel part of what you're sharing as a conversation and not just a droning monologue. Sometimes you'll hear me do this on the Content with Character podcast, where I bring in a specific example that I know a listener has shared with me. Or sometimes I even call attention to somebody by name and I give them a shout out. Hey, thank you so much to Christy for sharing this podcast with your entire team. Thank you so much to Karen Kenny for giving me a shout out in your stories last week. Personalize as much as possible, and remember that the more specific language that you're able to bring in is actually really, really powerful, especially when it's specific to this group, to this audience, to the people you are speaking to. It's really powerful. And it kind of keeps them guessing, like, ooh, is she going to say my name next? Are they going to call on me next? So I really like it for that reason. Also, it does keep people naturally engaged. It's like a pop quiz back in school. You never know what's coming, so you gotta be studying. All right. One of the things that I learned from watching other speakers was also a little tip about handouts, slides, sending people other places during a presentation, during a podcast. Let me tell you what I mean. So handouts, I do think are great. I do think that they can help people stay engaged when they are done right. I'm a big fan. This is just a personal preference. I'm a big fan of interactive handouts, meaning that, as I get a little glimmer of information, I get to actually like jot down an idea of maybe how I'm going to apply it or implement it myself. Or there's a little missing piece that I needed to wait for, and I can fill out my little handout with that missing piece as we go through the presentation. Handouts can help people to stay engaged as a tool also to help them rest assured that they don't need to vigorously take notes the entire presentation. So if you're able to say, it's in your handout, you don't need to write this down, I think it can really, really help people to stay engaged. And then sometimes people just really like taking notes, and taking notes actually helps them to retain the information and to stay engaged. So if you do see somebody taking notes, you don't have to keep on resting them assured. Like, it's in the handouts. Just let them take notes, okay? Just let them take notes. Same with slides. If you plan to offer slides to everyone after the fact, make sure you say that at the beginning so that they don't need to feel like they're taking notes of every single slide. Because I do think that actually can be distracting when you're trying to write down what is on the slides instead of listening to the person speaking. One thing I don't recommend, and I saw this done twice recently, is to say something like, oh, my slides are available. Just use a QR code on the screen and you'll get my slides. Or my handouts can be found using this QR code. What happens at that point, what people tend to do, is they will go ahead and point their phones at the screen. They'll get that QR code, but then guess what they do next? I watched this happen twice, and I was like, no. They go down the little rabbit hole of Google Drive, and who knows where else. Whatever you've given them to do, they're now somewhere totally different. Probably checking their email, probably on their Instagram, maybe figuring out a way to get this link because you put it in Google Drive and you didn't think through how they were going to download it on their phones. So that is something I would just be cautious of. I witnessed this specifically at a conference I attended in October. The woman had us take a quick survey towards the end. Now, she had not made her closing point yet, but she said, okay, this is just going to take 2 minutes. When you're done, everybody look back up, and that's how I'll know you're all finished. That's how I'll know you're all done with the survey. Just a quick 2-question survey, she says. Now, I have to tell you that I was guilty of this. 5 minutes later, after I had completed the survey, I was in my inbox replying to client emails. I was deleting emails. I was probably even unsubscribing to emails. I was in my inbox at that point, and it took her a lot of effort to regain our attention. And I think she definitely lost some people completely in that process. So watching that happen, I said to myself, that was a really good idea to have that survey. And she probably should have done it either at the very, very end of her presentation or figured out another way to get our info so that she could send it to us after the fact, because it ended up being just a wild distraction. And she had a really hard time wrangling us all back in now that we're down the rabbit hole of our cell phones. So if you decide to go with any of those routes, handouts, slides, a survey, just be really clear on how people are going to get the information after, and try to avoid them pulling out their cell phones maybe until the very, very end. Because I could actually see it could be fun to say hey, take a selfie with the person sitting next to you and tag us on Instagram. So I can see a place where a cell phone would be great in a presentation, but you may, no matter what you decide to do with it, you may want to just wait until the end, or do it right away in the beginning and then kind of break into something really engaging and exciting to get their attention back. Okay. Another idea I had for you was making sure that you're defining unfamiliar terms. And honestly, even familiar terms, you might want to define them if they're overused. So some examples I thought for myself, for my own work, is terms like marketing, visibility, content, authenticity, creativity. Like, we all know what they mean, but what do they mean to me? What do they mean to Emily? And then what do they actually mean to you, the business owner, the listener? So I really love this idea of maybe defining familiar terms that are overused. And if you're using unfamiliar terms, making sure to define those, especially if you're using jargon or complex language, make sure to define what it means. And if you need to, use analogies or examples to kind of like break down some of those more complex concepts. Alrighty, to take us home on the speaking front and the avoiding distractions when speaking. Just be conversational. You don't need flowery prose or waxing poetic here. I have a story for you. I'm not going to mention any names because I do want to protect the innocent, but a family member recently told me that she's been trying to end her sentences with less prepositions. I asked her what she meant and to also give me an example because I had a hunch what she was going to say next. And she shared with me, this was her example. She said, "Oh, well, instead of saying, 'Who do these keys belong to?' I reword it to something like, 'To whom do these keys belong?'" Oh, now, when I asked her why she was doing that, she told me that it was proper English and grammatically correct, which was the answer I was expecting her to give. Now, it is proper English and it is grammatically correct. But what's funny about this is that my husband and I, we've read some of these sentences and heard some of these sentences said in conversations, and we're like, why is she speaking to us like we're the queens and kings of England? They all, as you can probably tell, they have this sort of proper and buttoned up feel to them. And really, it's not actually very much like her and not very conversational. Although, like I said, she's been trying to implement some of this in her speaking too. Now, when she shared this with me, I just kind of offered an alternative perspective, something else to consider. I said that in conversation, I might just be a little more conversational and not worry about ending your sentences in prepositions. And I actually would say that in a lot of our copy, in most of the content we're creating, unless you're writing for the educational space or you're writing like your dissertation or something, you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to sacrifice that conversational flow with proper grammar because it ends up being a little bit distracting. I did include a link for you to an article I just read, which I found really interesting, all about ending sentences with prepositions. So if that's something for you that you're like, oh wait, I've been doing that in my speech and in my writing, you might just read this article and I don't know, maybe it'll change your role, maybe not. Some other things that people shared with me on the speaking or podcasting front are things like tisks. Like when someone goes, or ums, uhs, verbal distractions. You'll notice I say so a lot at the beginning of my sentences, which is super annoying and distracting, I know, and I'm working on it. But that said, I recently heard an alternative perspective. It was on an episode of the Grammar Girl podcast where she interviews the writer of Like Literally Dude by Valerie Fridland, which is a book about the dynamic, ongoing, and empowering evolution of language. And it is the argument for the good in bad English. It was a really interesting episode. Anyway, one of the things that she was talking about in that interview was that all of those ums and ahs and pauses and tisks, they're not so bad. She was saying that they actually help to prime us to anticipate that something is coming next. So, see, there you go. I did it again. Don't beat yourself up too much if you do those things when you speak or when you podcast. The other thing people shared was talking slow, and like really slow talkers can be very distracting for them. And I do agree. And I also think that we're all so used to speed consuming everything, and we probably all need to slow the heck down. So I don't know. I go both ways on that one. And then the very last thing people said, like that distracts them in speaking or audio, is ambient noise. And again, I'm going to go both ways on this one. So they were specifically referring to kids, dogs, pens dropping, those kinds of things. Now, I want to keep in mind and remind all of us that for some people, these things are unavoidable. So for some people, they don't have the opportunity to just lock themselves in a room and make it so that their kids, their dogs, are not making noise in the background. So I want to cut them some slack. And also, I want to give them props because they're human and they're being human, and that's okay. And things don't need to be perfect. And a few more people reminding us of that is a-okay with me. One thing that I do think is very important and can actually cause you to completely lose somebody altogether is baseline quality audio. There's almost nothing that gets me more unfocused as a listener than when somebody has a podcast or has a podcast guest on who called in from, I don't know, their cell phone or is using some cheap headset as a microphone. So that is something you might want to consider, is the overall audio quality. But as far as like, dropping your pen and making those little tisks and ums and so's, I don't know. Maybe that's just something we need to let go a little bit. And maybe you need to stop being so distracted by it. Just kidding. All right, we're going to fly through the ideas for written content and how to make it less distracting. A lot of what I shared in speaking can also be applied to written, vice versa. So I just have 3 for you here, and then I'm going to wrap us all up and take us home. Number 1 in the written content and making it less distracting is clear calls to action, clear guidance to links and where you want them to go, what action to take, how to do it, how to listen, how to get on your list. All of these things, very easy. People are moving fast. It's very easy for them to quickly move on and miss your next step entirely because they are moving at rapid paces. And you actually, when that happens, we do run the risk of like getting them so distracted that they don't come back, right? Or maybe it's just like too much of an extra step for them to reach out to you and say, hey, I couldn't find that link. Where is it? And so then they give up and don't sign up for your workshop. Number 2 on a way to help make your writing, your written content less distracting is not to, okay, if you're going to include a lot of links, I'm a big fan of interlinking and outlinking. But if you're going to include a lot of links, maybe just something that says all of the links to the resources will be at the bottom, so you don't have to worry about clicking them during the actual read until you're finished. I think in email, we can also run the risk of having just way, way, way too many links. So that might be another spot where at the bottom of your email, you kind of include a summary of the links. Maybe even say it at the beginning. All the links are at the bottom. But try in your email not to just pile it full of different links. On my podcast episodes, you'll notice at the beginning, I often say the links are in the show notes. I remind you throughout when I'm saying a link that it's going to be in the show notes because I don't want you to worry about having to go find it now, losing it. It's always going to be there for you in one spot at the end. So you can always go back and look at what we referenced. And then number 3 on how to make your written content a little less distracting. Once again, just like in written, just like in spoken, with written content, try to avoid that jargon, that complex language, that flowery prose, right? And going on and on and on, too many asides, all of that kind of thing can be a little bit distracting. So help them stay focused by staying focused yourself. And the way I like to do it is just start with a very simple question. Who is this for? What do I want them to walk away with? Oftentimes I have to read something twice and I'm like, wow, I don't think they need to know about my little side tangent. Some are wicked fun and cute and you can put things in parentheses and make little jokes and asides, but too many, you can see how it just spirals out of control very, very fast. Lastly, under this, just work on speaking to people like they are just one person, right? Usually it's just one reader on the other side engaging with what we're creating, one listener, so just talk to that person like you're addressing one person, not your entire Facebook audience. All right, we covered a lot. I know we covered a lot in this episode, so I want to sum it all up for you. And as I do, I just want to give the reminder that I think it's about working on what we can and taking kind of like small action steps to help ourselves be less distracting. Like, I don't know about you, but I have a lot of work to do in not distracting people in the content that I'm sharing. So let's sum it up. Do use signals, previews, and summaries. Do use storytelling, humor, your personality, engaging questions. When using visuals, try not to overload the slides with words. Try not to overload the handouts. Remind people if they're going to be getting them after the fact so that they don't spend the entire time taking notes, or not paying attention. Don't give people reasons to pick up their phones and distract themselves with their inboxes and Instagrams. Make relevant references to other speakers, to the event itself, to the people in the room. Use examples and specifics and really bring people into the moment. Be present yourself. Be in the moment yourself. Don't pack in too many links, too many places to go, too many side tangents, too many other things to do. Give clear calls to action and instructions on what to do and how to do it. Avoid complex language and jargon. Do define unfamiliar terms or terms maybe you want to give more personalized meaning to. Be conversational. And lastly, be as naturally you as possible. All right, so that wraps us up for this episode. Here is a question for you to reflect on as you kind of process all of this. What is just one thing? What is something you think that you can work on in your own content that will help people to stay more engaged and also less distracted? Like maybe there was something that jumped out at you, you heard, you're like, oh wow, I am pretty guilty of that one. And I can see how somebody would get distracted from that. So what's that one thing you can start doing and working on right away? Let me know if you pick something and also if you decide to practice with it. You can always connect with me at the link in the show notes. They're always there for you, or you can just email me directly, emily@emilyaborn.com. And because I'm sure you're just dying to know where we're headed next week, I shall tell you. We're going to talk about how to set realistic expectations for your content. It has a lot of potential and possibility. Content, copy, it has a lot of opportunity in it for us. And it's also not just so simple and straightforward as creating content, setting it, forgetting it, and boom, your business takes off overnight. So that's where we're going next week. And if you celebrate and you're listening to this the week of Thanksgiving here in the United States, happy Thanksgiving. If you don't celebrate, if you don't live in the United States, happy week. I will chat with you next episode. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Content with Character. If you loved the episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, and share it with someone else you know it could help. For more content and visibility tips, visit my blog at emilyaborn.com and be sure to connect with me on Instagram at emilyaborn. I'd love to hear how this inspired you to take action.